Our knowledge on God's love for David can be found in 1 Samuel, in fact, chapter 13. Verse 14 says, Yahweh has discovered a man after his own heart and designated him leader of his people. David enters Saul's service because Saul instructs his servants to find a harpist to help him with the evil spirit affecting him. And David, who is known to one of the servants, is recommended and described as one of the sons of Jesse, a Bethlehemite, a skilled player, a brave man and fighter, well-spoken, good-looking, and Yahweh is with him. David, already anointed king by Samuel, enters Saul's service as his arm-bearer and harpist. David defeated the Philistine Goliath in the name of God. What are the indications that David fulfills his fidelity to God, this loyalty that shapes this relationship where David is a man after God's own heart? We hear Saul's jealousy as the people praise David after he defeats Goliath. Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. Most astonishing is that David is willing to risk his own life by not killing Saul, although he had plenty of opportunities to do so, while Saul, out of jealousy, continues to set traps to kill him. Saul's scheming begins with David's marriage to Saul's daughter, Michal, believing that she can be a snare for David, sending David to fight the Philistine, expecting him to get killed in battle. David is even warned by Jonathan, Saul's son. They become close friends. Jonathan intercedes for David, speaking to Saul, pleading for David's safety. Saul himself attempts to kill David while he is playing the harp for him, throwing a spear at him, but David moves fast enough to avoid the spear. This time David's wife, Michal, helps David escape when Saul's agents attempt to kill David when he is in bed. David had the opportunity to kill Saul in a cave when Saul and his soldiers were pursuing David. Instead, he cut off the border of Saul's cloak. But even cutting off the border, David regrets, since it's like killing the very person. So the cloak that touches the person, and David says, God preserved me from doing such a thing to my Lord as to raise my hand against him, since he is Yahweh's anointed. Saul makes numerous attempts on David's life out of jealousy. Saul sees that David is loved by Saul's own family and by the people, and David has an army supporting him. David has the opportunity to kill Saul, but does not, because, as David says, he is Yahweh's anointed. David will not put his hand on Saul, God's anointed, and even regrets cutting the border of his cloak. We need to appreciate that David is willing to risk his life instead of taking the life of God's anointed. Now, David, we know, is anointed by Samuel, king of Israel, but this was not made public. David knows, Samuel knows, but Saul still lives. And for David, he remains God's publicly anointed before the people. He sees himself as having no right or authority to remove Saul by killing God's anointed. We have a beautiful passage when David encounters Saul shortly after the incident in the cave. Once again, David and his men had the opportunity to strike Saul when Saul was discovered, trying once again to hunt down David. Abishai offered to go down with David and was willing to strike Saul. Again, David says, do not kill him, for who could raise his hand against Yahweh's anointed and go unpunished? Clearly, David understood God's transcendence, God's power, God's authority. David loved God, and David feared God. Saul's death is tragic. At the Battle of Gilboa, the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. Saul was wounded but not killed. Saul took a sword and fell on it. When David heard the news, we discover how he not only respected Saul as God's anointed, but he loved Saul and his son, Jonathan. Saul and Jonathan's death bring out the heart of David, the man who would not lay his hand on God's anointed, and he had great affection for Saul's son Jonathan. David was victorious in battle against the Amalekites. But hearing the news of Saul, his sons, including Jonathan, David tore his clothes, mourned, wept, and fasted. David wrote an elegy over Saul and Jonathan, and one stanza reads, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and handsome, were divided neither in life nor in death. Swifter than eagles were they, stronger than lions. Would you like to be a man after God's own heart? Like David, are you able to love those who try to put you down? Our knowledge on God's love for David can be found in 1 Samuel, in fact, chapter 13. Verse 14 says, Yahweh has discovered a man after his own heart and designated him leader of his people. David enters Saul's service because Saul instructed